Afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Lunch and Learn with the Museum of American Finance, or in this case, several floors above the Museum of American Finance, as we are still dealing with the aftermath of a very large flood that occurred in our space, and currently our exhibits are closed to the public. Today's guest is George Robb, and the topic of the book is Ladies of the Ticker. George Robb is a professor at William Patterson University, and he's a history teacher there, and it's his third book. The two others were White Collar Crime in Modern England and British Culture and the First World War. He's also written for our magazine, and 2 issues ago, his article on women on Wall Street was actually the cover story. George's PhD is from Northwestern University, and he was a Fulbright scholar. Now, the cover image of this book is really enticing for 2 reasons. You see it up there as well. First is this wonderful expression on this stock market investor who must have really hit it big. And second is that this is an image from our collection. George conducted research here and dialogued with our deputy director, Kristen Aguilera, who is mentioned in the acknowledgments. I'm going to leave it to George to explain who or what company that image was an advertisement for. Now, I have to share with you that this book is incredibly well researched. There are over 700 footnotes, a massive biography that includes 400 primary source articles. So he should be acknowledged for his meticulousness and careful scholarship. Now, it's often said, and I concur, that one of the best ways to teach history is through the telling of stories. And if you believe that, then Ladies of the Tickers will have some great ones, I believe, that we're going to hear in a few moments. Happy to autograph it if you would be so inclined to purchase it. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor George Robb.
Today, Wall Street looms large in the American imagination. We take it for granted as a symbol of American capitalism, as in a key indicator of economic health. But this is a relatively new phenomenon. It was only in the 1870s, in the decade following the Civil War, that Wall Street burst onto the national consciousness. A tremendous expansion of the stock market took place to finance the building of railroads and industrial development. The capital needed to support massive corporations like the Pennsylvania Railroad or U.S. Steel or AT&T was raised by selling stocks and bonds on American stock exchanges, especially the New York Stock Exchange. These financial securities became an important investment outlet for wealthy and middle-class Americans, women as well as men. A national securities market spread out from Wall Street and across the country. The invention of the stock ticker in 1867 meant that share prices were now available nationwide, transmitted instantaneously and continuously via the telegraph wires. And you see the stock ticker over there. I try to explain to my students. This was the IT, this was the miracle of its day. While American business depended on the stock market, Wall Street had a bad reputation among ordinary Americans in the 19th century. Stock market crashes occurred at regular intervals: 1873, 1884, 1893, 1907, 1929. And these led to, in some cases, economic recession. They might have wiped out people's savings. Muckraking journalists of the progressive era delighted in exposing the corrupt business practices of Wall Street tycoons like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, or Daniel Drew. Many religious people, conservative people, also believed that making money on the rise and fall of shares was gambling. Honest people should work for their money. It was bad enough that men engaged in stock gambling, but the thought that women might do this was seen as especially offensive. Women were expected to behave with greater modesty and self-control and to set a moral example for men. Wall Street had the reputation as a hyper-masculine environment. In many ways, it still does. In Victorian America, women stock market investors and financiers were not supposed to exist, but they did. For example, in September 1882, the New York Times observed, quote, "Wall Street is overrun with women, women who are old and women who are young, women who are poorly clad and women in rich attire, women attractive and women repulsive, all with an eye single to gain." So, we know women were involved with the stock market early on, But finding out about those women has not been easy, and that was part of what my book is about. And it wasn't easy finding material about some of these pioneering women, both women who were early brokers, but women who were investors. I think this image from around 1900 dramatizes the extraordinary situation of businesswomen 100 years ago. There were very few of them, and they're not easy to find. It's like, where's Waldo? Where's Mabel? Pioneering, these are the sales staff of the Prudential Insurance Company, an important financial services firm. But one woman, we don't even know who she is. Haven't been able to find out her identity. Pioneering women financiers are still hard to locate in the historical records that have survived. Business history was not taken seriously as an academic discipline until the 1930s, and women's history not until the 1960s. Libraries and archives were mostly uninterested in acquiring materials related to either business or women, let alone businesswomen. Most businesses, including long-lived corporations, have been slow to recognize the historical value of their records. A great deal has been thrown away. A lot is still unavailable to researchers. This is another image that comes from the Museum of American Finance, right? They've got a great collection here. So even finding images like this from 100 years ago, it's hard. And, right, it's this woman posing with a stock ticker. It's obviously a posed photo. For what purpose? I don't know. This is the cover of my book, right? The press colorized it, right, to make it pop out. This is the original image they have here in the collection at the museum. But as you can see, it was an advertisement for cigarettes, for the Duke Cigarette Company, right? The people who gave us Duke University, and Doris Duke. Preferred stock, so it's like, cigarettes for the successful businessman. So they did a whole series of these advertisements of women posing with stock tickers, excited at their winnings. But I think it was meant to be kind of comic, a little bit funny. This idea of a woman with a stock ticker, like a monkey on a bicycle. It's just a little bit, silly. They're not really supposed to be doing this, right? And at the time, cigarettes were marketed entirely towards men. So these advertisements would have definitely been directed to men. This is a Wall Street, a Broadway musical, a popular Broadway musical from 1912 called The Wall Street Girl. And it was a comedy about a brokeress, and she saved her father from bankruptcy through a lucky investment on Wall Street, and then she quits to marry the man she loves. So, yeah, that's her little Wall Street broker-ass outfit, right? This is an especially misogynist image. It's like women where the ticker tape is coming right out of their mouth. And it's like, women are such gossips. They should just have the ticker tape coming out of their mouth. So it's again, the assumption was that women with stock tickers were like a fish out of water. They're not in their natural element. It's somehow inappropriate. Virginia Penny was an early advocate for women's employment. And in 1863, she wrote a book called The Employments of Women, in which she's trying to advocate for new sorts of jobs for women to do. So even though she's looking for new fields of employment for women, in this book she says there are no women stockbrokers in the United States in 1863, and that's a good thing, because this would not be appropriate work for women, because they would have to mix promiscuously on the street with strange men, and the modesty of women would forbid them from doing that. So in the 19th century, in the Victorian age, there's this idea of separate spheres, that there is a kind of natural, God-given sphere for men and women. And for women, it was the home, it was the family, and for men, it was everything else, right? Business, the professions, politics. So the idea that for women to engage in stock market activity, for women to engage in business, would somehow keep her from fulfilling her natural functions as a wife and mother. This is a cartoon from 1870 called Woman in Wall Street. And the caption is where she supposedly, you see there's a stockbroker in the background. She's supposed to be a stockbroker, and this is a man coming to buy stock from her. And she's saying, "Oh dear, how can I attend to business when I've baby to mind?" So it's like, it's not subtle, but this is the sort of thing that women were having to come up against at the time. This is another image from a magazine from the early 20th century. And it's this sort of fantasy. This is what Wall Street would be like if it was full of women. and it's called Women in a Panic. So the idea is there's been a drop in stock prices, and the women are running around like with chickens with their heads cut off because they're so emotional. They couldn't, supposedly men had the equanimity to deal with their sudden rise and fall in shares, but women were too prone to hysteria, to this kind of idea. So the idea was that the only sort of women who would even want to enter Wall Street would be brazen, immoral women who had rejected their proper sphere. Women like Victoria Woodhull. She and her sister, Tennessee Claflin, became America's first women brokers in 1870. The business was short-lived, and it was ended by sexual scandal. Here, Woodhull and her sister drive a chariot pulled by bulls and bears over the hapless bodies of male investors. And the bulls and bears have the faces of Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jim Fisk, two well-known Wall Street operators. While trying to earn a living on Wall Street, Woodhull alienated male financiers by exposing their corrupt practices. They in turn denounced her as an impudent and immoral woman. It turns out she was divorced, and that she also advocated free love. This cartoon from 1875 imagines women brokers as little better than prostitutes, and it's clearly meant to be Woodhull and her sister. It says female brokers securing a customer. So if you didn't know this was meant to be women stockbrokers, you would almost assume it was a scene from a fancy brothel, the way they're dressed. There's a champagne bottle open on the table. These women are sort of stroking this man. But if you look closely, one of them is holding a share certificate. She's trying to sell him. So this is the only way women can succeed on Wall Street is by employing their feminine wiles. Woodhull's career does not go well, but she casts a long shadow over other women who tried to follow in her footsteps, because in the future, other women who tried to set up as brokers was like, well, you're just another Victoria Woodhull, you're just another, impudent and immodest woman. Here's another sort of eroticized image of a woman on Wall Street, a postcard called A Sensation in Wall Street, right? Just the very presence of a woman in Wall Street caused a sensation, and especially when she's showing a little ankle, right? This is from about 1900. So conservative commentators feared that women's entry into the world of business would masculinize them, rendering them aggressive, ruthless, and mannish. The stereotype of the new woman as a social and sexual misfit was omnipresent in the popular culture of the late 1800s. Cartoons depicted her as careless of her appearance, dressed in drab utilitarian clothing, and shod in sensible shoes. This cartoon from 1894 was entitled The Redundant Woman, meaning the extra woman, the woman who's not married, because of course no one wants to marry her. And women like this are the ones who want to pursue unconventional careers, because they couldn't get a man. So these kinds of negative stereotypes were, as I say, they were omnipresent at the time, and the women were constantly having to deal with this. There's no shortage of such negative image. There was also a lot of prescriptive literature warning women away from the stock market. This is an interesting memoir written in the 1880s by Henry Clews, who was a famous, almost legendary Wall Street broker. And he has a lot of stories, comic stories, in this memoir about women on Wall Street. He talks about Victoria Woodhull and what a failure she was, but he also talks a lot about women customers and how they're so incapable, and the minute a stock starts to go down, they panic and want to sell it. And so, he goes on and on with a lot of stories about how, this is just not appropriate for women to be doing this. So, again, this sort of thing is, these sorts of negative images were very common. So there's a lot of, and part of what my book does is it looks at this. It looks at how common and how much negativity is directed against women in Wall Street. And I think historians, myself included, have long assumed that women were probably inhibited and intimidated by all of this negativity. But were they?